helper with me today, which I think his name is Dave. I think he's Dave. He's from Despicable Me. Did anybody see that movie? Despicable Me? Oh, we only have a few people in the room who have. Well, I'm going to talk a little bit about it in a second, part of the message today. I don't know if anybody else has been feeling sick, like just physically sick, physically ill. I think it's going around. There's several people who I know who haven't been feeling good. And if you're like me, when I don't feel good, everything seems a little bit harder to do. I have like an amazing schedule, very, very hectic. And when you don't feel good, it just seems harder. Harder to do the things that you have to do. And how it manifests in me is lack of patience. I have lack of patience, I have lack of irritability. I mean, not lack of irritability, I have plenty of irritability. I have plenty of that for all of us. And you know, the Catholic, I was raised in the Catholic tradition, and so the confessing part is very important for us Catholics. We have to make confessions. So I feel so bad when I'm irritable. I feel so bad when I'm angry. I feel so bad when I lose my patience and lose my temper. I feel so bad when I have jealousy and anger and all of those things, all of those defects of character in there. And they all come from the ego place, you know? And I beat myself up, and sometimes I feel like a big fraud. I feel like a fraud. You know, Rev G? You know, Rev G is up here, he's gonna do a sermon, he's gonna do a message. Rev G does stuff at the Darshan Center, you know, Om Shanti, you know, and I'm making a joke out of it, but sometimes I you know, in my private time, I can even start to cry about it, because I try so hard. You know, I really do, and I want to be good. I want to be a good person, and I want to practice what I preach. You know, I want to walk the talk. I don't want to just talk the talk. And I know I have a higher consciousness. I know that I can be love and light. So how can I be acting so humanly irritable? How can I be in so much anger or jealousy or envy or impatience or intolerance or lack of compassion? So where does that come from? You know, this dualistic binary thinking of good or bad, evil or purity, perfection versus progress, shadow versus light. In the Mohawk tradition, it's said that every person has both a bad heart and a good heart. No matter how good a man seems, he has some evil. And no matter how bad a man seems, there's some good about him. So that no man is perfect. And in the Hindu tradition, they talk about these things called vasanas, samskaras, which really are, here's your soul, which, let's not forget, that is absolutely perfect. It's made up of the same ingredients of God. God is all that is, thatness, suchness, isness, source, divine energy. Made up of the same ingredients, the soul, right? There's perfection there. So how could there be imperfection in perfection? And well, the Hindus talk about the fact that the soul is hidden and veiled by, first of all, ignorance, and the ego self. And so we're sort of like doing the best we can, but when we're in this body, we're limited. And our soul is sort of like veiled. Carl Jung talks about the shadow. And the shadow aspect of us, which is part of our unconscious mind, and it consists of repressed weaknesses and shortcomings and defects and instincts. So what this looks like in me is arrogance, my pride, my impatience, my needing to be right all the time, my way is the right way. All of these are my defects of character, my human side. The shadow contrasting the light. Now, not only do we judge our own behaviors and thoughts as sometimes bad, we more than likely experience these defects and bad behaviors in other people. We experience them, we see them. In recovery, we have a thing called you spot it, you got it. I'm really good at that. It's one of my vasanas. Well, it's one of my shortcomings. One of my the impressions that kind of surround my soul. They veil it. They're inside of my ego in the unconscious state. That's probably why I was a cop. I could judge people. I could pick out the bad behavior really well. This is the bad behavior I'm seeing is the bad behavior in me. Now this dark side of us, Jung says, our shadow self, it shouldn't be necessarily judged as right or wrong. See, so there's the Catholic tradition in me, the upbringing in me, the guilt in me, that right away when I see a defect of mine pop up, I judge it right away. I get really, really hard on myself. And I start beating myself up. But every time I get that little ouch, when a defect rises, this is what Rumi's talking about when he says, how can you ever be polished if you're annoyed by every rub? Because what I'm realizing more and more is that every time one of the defects comes up for me, in me, or in you, and I get annoyed about it, see, I'm aware of it. See, like in the past, I wasn't really necessarily aware of the defects. But now, today, I become a little bit more aware of it. So when I shine light, the light of awareness on the shadow, I begin to evolve. A friend of mine, actually a former seminarian, he was a student of mine. I was his dean at the seminary, Rev G. He urges me to always consider the possibility, though, that our higher self, the blessed self, divine source, spirit, embraces our defects, embraces our irritability. And I had to bring him because I love him. Sorry. Pressing too much. But, so what if this was ego, right? So what if this is ego and source, divine energy, source, God, goddess, all that is, called by whatever name you want. In the Tao Te Ching they say, the eternal Tao is that which cannot really be named. So let's just say divine presence. Let's say the divine presence holds on to our little ego and loves it. And it has so much compassion when irritability rises, when a tantrum happens, when we pout, when we get jealous, when we do all of those defects, when all of our defects are raging. He says to me, Reverend John Smith says, so what if our shadow actually experiences joy in response to our humanness? What if the higher self, the divine presence, is somehow nurtured by these lovely and dramatic pouts? Because it facilitates a knowing of the divine self in response to the ego self. Divine self only experiences itself in response to what is not divine self, like the shadow and the light. And in the process of that comes profound joy and spiritual evolution. So what that means to me is that every time I act out and I do something that it's like, oh, I catch myself. At least now I catch myself a little bit, quicker. And I don't stay there for too much, too long anymore. But here's the best part of this is that when I become aware that I'm doing it, it's like, oh, doing it again, instead of beating myself up for it, the divine presence is profoundly joyful because I have shown the light of awareness on it. Perhaps our divine self actually giggles. Maybe our divine self giggles as we stomp around this life, much like a loving parent would softly laugh at the silliness of a young, clumsy, beloved child. So what do you think? You think this is a cop-out? You think all of this is a cop-out? Let me off the hook for my bad behavior? There's the cop in me right away wanting to not allow you off the hook, right? But here's the hit for me. The awareness that I'm being irritable, the awareness that I'm an ego self, the awareness of the pouting and the tantrum is the road to enlightenment. It's the awareness of the dark that allows the light to do its thing. It's in the awareness of what doesn't work for me that I am evolving and becoming enlightened. Now, just as a caveat, I want to remind us that, as I said earlier, the true nature of who we are is perfect. There is no darkness in us, only light. The soul, the essence of who we really are, our true nature is perfect. The shadow self is just the negative of the photograph. And there's no real judgment around the negative of a photograph. It's not bad, it's just the negative of it. In fact, it's the negative that gives us the beautiful picture, ultimately. This shadow only represents our ego, that which buys into the illusion that we are only matter. The moment we wake up to who we really are, the song, I love that song, I know what, don't you know who I am? No, it's not don't you know who I am, it's I know who I am. Not grace in this body, no. The spirit. We are, after all, spiritual beings having a human experience. And I think that this is what Jesus was talking about in that story of where Jesus goes into the Garden of Gethsemane and he goes to pray and he says to his disciples, can you stay awake? Keep watch with me. And then he goes and he prays and he comes back and they're asleep. Now most people think, oh, Jesus was disappointed. So you couldn't stay awake with me. He wasn't really disappointed. He's really giving us a message about stay awake. Remember who you are. And then he says, as a loving way, he says, the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. He says, I know you're spiritual beings having a human experience, and it was the human side of you that couldn't stay awake. It's okay. We love you. We love you. Pema Chodron, the Buddhist nun, talks about shining compassionate light on the shadow of our inadequacies and our weaknesses, shining the light of love on those aspects, just as we heard in the meditation. A friend of mine was talking about, she said, I want to be a better Buddhist. I'm not a good Buddhist because I still cling. What a perfect Buddhist. She's aware she's not clinging. She's aware that she's clinging. It's the awareness that's the key. So this guy, Dave, comes from a movie called Despicable Me, and it's Despicable Me 1 and 2. And in Despicable Me 2, these are minions, who I feel are like our ego cells or our little defects of character or whatever. What happens is they get they get poisoned or something, or they get injected with some kind of evil serum, and they become evil minions. And they grow purple hair, and they have big teeth, and they have to get another antidote. They have to get an antidote to get them back to their true nature, to their true selves. So I feel like that's what we are when we're acting out in our defects, our shortcomings, our vasanas, as the Hindus say. shining light is the serum. The light of awareness, the fact that I am aware and mindful of my inadequacies is the serum, is the antidote. And the same thing like in Monsters, Inc. Have anybody seen Monsters, Inc.? You guys gotta get out more. I'm telling you right now. A thing called Netflix. All right. In Monsters, Inc., there's a little girl named Boo. And Boo faces Sully, the monster, who was in the closet, and she was always so afraid of him until she met him finally. And in the light of awareness, she becomes friends with him. So in the light of our awareness, we are already in a state of perfection. We are already on the road to enlightenment. We see the world with a divine lens, that each day our perspective is changing. And we're doing the best we can. And it's all good. And we're evolving. We know that we're bound by our human nature. And that while I have to confess up here, in front of all these witnesses, that we are between the light and the shadow, we are waking up to who we really are, one day at a time. Our spiritual journey must be like photography, to continuously develop from the negatives. And if my true self delights and giggles at my shadow, perhaps I too should chuckle along.